When I teach, I like to not do immersion type teaching. I believe that immersion type teaching comes once they know format. In any language in the world, pick any language, I don't care which language, it has a format, it has a structure. It has to, because if you don't, then that means that the language would be just all over the place. So if you go from A to Z or Z, whatever you want to call it, in any language, you'd find that there's a footprint. You can call it that. And especially in the indigenous languages, because the indigenous languages all function the same. Now, when you do immersion, and you have a large language base, like 1,000, 2,000 fluent speakers, you're okay for a while. But eventually, the loss of language does occur, because what we experience is Tsuut'ina. I have some material from 1918, 1920, developed by John Whitney, the informant and linguist, Edward Sapir. And some of those words, although naturally, the words of war, the words of hunting, the words of survival, are starting to be dormant. I won't say leaving the vocabulary, they're just dormant. And if you recall that the words, they're there. But when you do immersion, you start dropping parts of the language that are essential to structure. Or you begin to talk nonsense languages. When I teach, I like to do phonology. So all phonology is the study of sound. So when I do that, I explain how sound is made, how the air rises at your diaphragm, and then it rises to your lungs, and it becomes constricted in a voice box for you to begin to articulate sound. So I go through that whole process. I show them the areas of articulation. In Tsuut'ina, it has 32 sounds, and so I explain, what phonology is. And so when we're going through that, the sounds in English that you cannot there's sounds in Tsuut'ina that has no comparison in English. Only in word final. Like if you're trying to say ts, you can use the word butts, and you can go like that and say that's a ts sound. But in Tsuut'ina, because it's word initial or word internal, it's hard to explain that way, but we use it anyway. There's no sl sound, the lateral L, where the sound is made on the side of your mouth, like ear, those kind of sounds. And the adjectives. In English, there are no adjectives. In Tsuut'ina, there are adjectives like so those sounds, the ejective sounds, there's nothing compared, you cannot compare it to English. So what happens is, especially on the t, like in Tsuut'ina, the closest English sound to this t is d. So in our community, you're starting to hear Tsuut'ina And when I teach, I try to tell the students, do not go there, because you need the adjectives to actually categorize words and sounds in Tsuut'ina. Without the adjectives, then it becomes rather impossible to articulate the differences, because sometimes you have like two, like a t and a d, like Tsuut'ina, okay? And so it becomes hard to, especially a new speaker, to say, to identify the different sounds if you do an immersion. And also the tuta, okay, in the water, tuta. So it's this ta sound is important. If you don't have it, you have tuta, which is a different word that means among the water. So the adjectives become very important in teaching. So that's part of the phonology, okay? That's the phonological sounds in Tsuut'ina. And an orthography of Tsuut'ina, as you know, is based on phonology, because orthography is actually representation of sound. So when I teach phonology, I say that in Tsuut'ina, because it's a representation of sound, every character that appears as a sound, even your double consonant sounds, it's only one sound. It's a gl sound. So this it's not like English, a D and a L. So that's how I explain it. And so so this is a Tsuut'ina sound. It's a gl sound. Okay, so I go through that. And so when I teach, I say, okay, ology, the word ology, it denotes the study of. So the study of morphemes is how I interpret it, okay? So when you get into morphemes, all the indigenous languages are based on the building blocks of morphemes. And how I explain it, as I say that, like the Lego blocks, you need one piece to fit into the other and to create something. So it's the same as Tsuut'ina. Like the nit'ata. This da means how. This ne means you. This da is a state of being. And this da is a question marker. Okay, so because it's an oral language, somehow you have to mark the end of the sentence. In storytelling, it's la. So in storytelling, it's la. No, te yalla. So end of an event that took place. He walked over there. It was. So it was. La means it was. So it puts the listener on notice that an event happened. He walked over there. Okay? So it tells the listener that la, it ended that sentence. So in syntax, I tell the students that dishgush means it is black. So we use dishgush for the color when they're asking for colors. We say it's black. But I make sure that they understand that it comes from it is black. It doesn't mean black, because you can't say gush for it to mean black. So, and further to that, there are no imperatives in Tsuut'ina. There are some, but it's kind of not really imperatives. Because in a culture, you're not allowed to tell another human being how to live his life. So, like you can say go in English, okay? You can say go because you is understood. Okay, so you can say that. But in Tsuut'ina, you cannot say yeah and for it to mean anything. I can't say to my friend, yeah, it won't mean anything. I have to say, yeah, you go. And then there's another one, Kutsua. This is something like an imperative. All this means is go ahead. And Kutsua, so maybe that's an imperative. But I cannot say sleep, ta, because ta is all over the place in the language. Same as ya, okay? So syntax, it's important to keep structure. You cannot, because Tsuut'ina, we've been among the Blackfoot for 400 years and we did not borrow any words. English, over the millennia, over the centuries, have been invaded and over and occupied by different peoples. The French, the Celts, the Vikings. There's been many different groups that invaded England, and they borrowed words. 3 years ago, they borrowed 10,000 words. Last year, they borrowed another 1,000. So English is continuously borrowing words from other nations, but Tsuut'ina cannot. So why veer from that course that was set way back in ancient times? Tsuut'ina cannot borrow, so that's because the patterns were set, and it's hard to break into the encoding, I guess you can call it. And unlike some of the other tribes, like the Dené, they have a th sound. And so when they say coffee, they say coffee. And the Navajo, they have a B. So when they say money, they say peso. They borrowed that from the Spanish. And of course, coffee, they borrowed it from English. I think that's where it comes from. Okay, so semantics. When we talk about semantics, we go back and forth with morphology because each one of the parts of the word in Tsuut'ina carries a meaning. At the same time, you have to talk about idioms, okay? As a speaker, when I hear Tsuut'ina cell, I do not hear was beaten with a stick, which it actually means. But what an idiomatic expression of Tsuut'ina cell means I was very tired and sleepy. That's what it means. So we go back and forth with semantics and morphology. So the last one is the lexicon. So because there's really no words that are how you say it? So there's no words that are, there's no sound. There's no sound in Tsuut'ina that isn't a true sound. We just say, okay, in lexicon, it means, of course, words. The lexicon, like in English, you got tough, you got rough. So actually, in English, tough and rough, they come out like this, T-U-F, with the F sound. And then, so it'll never happen in Tsuut'ina. So we go and we explain the lexicon. And so it's really not too much to explain, because the lexicon is actually not individual words. So and then we go into nouns with the lexicon. And then we go into the nominalizers, which is e and a. So what we do is we say dia is the dia with a flat tone. Dia is your verb phrase. When you add I, it's dia, and then you have dia. So in the lexicon, we only cover this because I don't know of any other cases where, you know, the enclitics actually give a different meaning to the word other than the nominalizers. So we kind of just stay to the nouns, just to show how the some of the words in Tsuut'ina, the nouns actually come from verb phrases. And in Tsuut'ina, there's very few nouns, not like English. There's thousands. In Tsuut'ina, real nouns maybe 200-300. So it's not something that when I teach, I don't waste my time on nouns, because you can do more productive teaching talking about verb phrases, because that's all the languages, all the indigenous languages are verb-based, action words. That's why you can go on and on and on with the teaching Tsuut'ina, because you can just add the morphemes that would fit within the scope of the word boundaries that go with your verb stem. So we go into that and we explain, you know, how it functions. So the nouns are like numbers, all the a words, colors. The numbers up to 10, then they become adverbial phrases. And then some real nouns like sa, body parts like tse. So the inventory of nouns is not the greatest. It doesn't have a big number in Tsuut'ina or any other indigenous languages. Horse, dog, those kind of words, water, tree, those kind of words are the ones that I call true nouns. So in the makeup of Tsuut'ina, we explain all that in a way that it's understandable to the student. And without structure, it's difficult you can pick up the language, but you need to know what you're saying. And so to me, immersion is if you're going to France and you want to know how to order food, or you know how to pay your hotel bill and make an argument, that's immersion. And French, you can do French, you can do Italian, you can do Spanish. And because there's millions of speakers, but Tsuut'ina, you only got 27. So it's impossible to do immersion, because retention and how you say, making it, giving it sense with all the properties of language, phonology, morphology, syntax and semantics and the lexicon. Without understanding what makes up a language, it's difficult to do that when you do an immersion, because my immersion was 24/7. The student, even in university and college, 3 hours, still you got to have language in the home. So that's the biggest roadblock. Immersion will work if it's done properly, but it's got to have reading and writing